Let's start. Namaste and good afternoon. I am Sajina Rai, Program Coordinator at AIGIA. It is my pleasure to welcome you at a webinar on Science Diplomacy, Emerging Priority of Nepal's Foreign Policy. So today we have very eminent speakers with us, and I'm sure that their views and comments, inputs will enrich this dialogue. This session will be live on social media accounts of AIGIA, and we have Mr. Ganesha as the chair of this session. He is the former former Minister of Environment, Science and Technology and Government of Nepal. So he has MTech Technical Engineering from Patrice Lumumba People's Friendship University in Russia. So he is the board member of Smart Wash Solutions in Nepal and advisory board member of AIGIA. And he is advisor at Society of Public Health and Engineers Nepal. And he is a big advocate of climate change and science diplomacy in Nepal. So, and he is also known for being one of the technology savvy politician in Nepal. So, and we have Dr. Rajendra Bahadur Shrestha. Rajendra sir has a PhD in agricultural and research economics from the University of Hawaii, and he specializes in sustainable economic development and diplomacy, including climate change, food security, and he has over 35 years of international development experience working with the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, UNDP, and many bilateral and multilateral agencies as team leader and senior advisor. He has led many international and national seminars as key resource person relating to international, bilateral, and multilateral cooperation. He was a faculty at University of Hawaii and a senior faculty at SEDA. He was a member of number of high-level task forces of government of Nepal, including MOFA, Charter President, RI District 3292, and President of Nepal Council of World Affairs, NCWA, and former President of International Center for Sustainable Development and Diplomacy. And we have Dr. Ramesh Kumar Maske. Professor Dr. Ramesh Kumar Maske is the science coordinator at Nepal National Commission for UNESCO. Dr. Maske is a retired professor of civil engineering from Kathmandu University, and he is active as product development consultant of Madan Bhandari University of Science and Technology under development. He is an academician of the Nepal Academy of Science and Technology. He is an expert in hydropower and renewable science energy technology, and keeps his interest in science diplomacy for nation's prosperity. Today we were supposed to join by another Indian speaker, but he just informed me that due to some urgency, he could not join this session. So maybe we will have in another upcoming session. So without further delay, I request Ganesh sir to deliver his remarks. Thank you. Yes, other sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, Sajina ji, for organizing this interaction on the science diplomacy. Last week, on the first of the Asoj, Nepali calendar, it was the last Friday, we celebrated the 9th National Science Day. And on that occasion also, there were various programs, but on the very important program was on the science diplomacy, which was basically all the was done by Professor Dr. Ramesh Maske. We can show more highlights. There were a lot of dignitaries, excellencies from the different countries. So you can also take the reference. Now, regarding today's program, I would like to say a few words regarding the two, three things. First thing is why science diplomacy is needed today's world. Because all of we know this, at least myself, I went to Soviet Union in 1968. That time, after the Second World War, after the 50s, because Nepal aside in 1950, during the 50s, 5 and 60, Nepal has all the diplomatic relations from the different countries of the world. Now, I don't know exactly, Dr. Rajendra Shrestha and other people will say how many countries we have our diplomatic relation, in how many countries we have our honorary consuls, etc. But I can say largely we have the globally, there is two type of diplomats, I call it. One is the official diplomats, and another is the people diplomats. Normally in diplomacy, we call it track one and track two. So for both this track one and track two, the science diplomacy is very, very important. First, let us talk about the track one. Our just newly appointed foreign minister is also in UN. I don't know what are the issues you will be raising in the UN or while you'll be meeting the other dignitaries in the New York, but anything she says, it must be based on the science-based and evidence-based. Then only the people will listen to you. For example, the global warming we are talking, climate change we are talking, and other things. So first thing is that for track one diplomacy, I mean for the government, the scientific evidence, data on which policy has incidence. And as all of we know that this science diplomacy is a new diplomacy. It's a new chapter or it is a new agenda for the track one also. Now while talking, it is more needed in the track two because track two is very, very important for the science diplomacy. I sometimes say that I participated in my life twice. There was a People's Diplomat Forum organized in the Moscow, and they were talking that all the graduates from the different countries, they are also like the people's diplomat. You see, the people's to people relations they are changing. Soviet Union used to send before other countries. You see, their professor, lecturer. I was just going through a book. I think Ramesh Mask will be doing better of this book. You see, which is written by the Bola Thapa about the engineering Shikshaka engineer, and he's talking about the professor who came to Nepal to build the foundation of the engineering education in the Kathmandu University. I remember my young life when from the Soviet Union or the Russia, the teachers, professors used to come and teach in the Askal and the other places. So these things was on the old, I will say, model or the just a small scale. Now the scale has changed due to the fourth stage of industrial revolution. Now we are living in the age of the fourth industrial revolution, or what we sometimes call science and technological revolution. Sometimes to call people it is as a IT revolution. And now all the emerging technology, especially it is not only the information technology. We have been talking a decade ago about the robotics. Now we are talking about the artificial intelligence. Before you, if is a security advisor to the prime minister, they will talk about the Bofors and other things. Now we talk about the cyber securities. So in these changing scenarios of the world, the science diplomacy has become very, very important. And for this, I think that at the different level of dialogue, and cooperation and collaboration is necessary. For example, I talked that on the science diplomacy, our academic institution has to be first discuss about this. Sajina is also a student now still. So why not to develop a course curriculum so that we teach the science diplomacy in our international relations. Now international relations, one of the component might be it may be a full course or might be it's a specialized course. I am not from the academic background, but I want to see in the coming days that there are the graduates who will write that my PhD, my higher education master degree is in the science diplomacy. We have seen the master degree in environment science, so many science, but I have not seen any master degree or MPhil or PhD doctors in the science diplomacy. So our educational institutions, academic institutions has to give a first attention to this. Second is in the different countries, we have the science academy. You see, for example, we have the apex body, the National Academy of Science and Technology, NAS. Similarly, the different countries had it on the different level. We have recently opened the Gandhiki Science Technology Academy also. So these academy may be of the federal government, maybe of the provincial government, because in that the same way is the other countries also. In the America, there's a National Science Foundation. So all these apex bodies on the science and technology has to cooperate, collaborate, and develop exchange between the academia. I am recently following in India, there's a forum for the science diplomacy. I think from there is also the representative joining our program. So they are regularly conducting the different programs, this forum on the science diplomacy. So lastly, I appeal to our policymakers, decision makers, that if the NAS take initiative to form a forum of the science diplomacy, or our government in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs can make a section which will be looked at more on the science diplomacy, they work out the detailed agendas, work out the prospective fellows who can contribute in this section. So lastly, I always recommend, and the IDA should also regularly conduct the program. Before also we have conducted 2-3 this type of interaction. So in the coming days also, IDA should continue at the different level, might be on with the collaboration with the Foreign Ministry, IFA, and other department academic institution. So with these few remarks, I welcome all of you, and I recommend everybody. Only one thing I recommend on these programs, I sometimes do not see what the time, how much time I have spoken, but there are other speaker, professors, doctors, who all the time take time keeping, or Sajina will give you some indicators that please keep the time also so that we finish the program on time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. So I think we don't have issue on time because one of the speaker is not here today. So yes, sir, it's very good to hear from you, and I think it's very good point to like include science diplomacy in our academic courses. And I think we have a IRD department in TU, so maybe they will include it on their courses, or we can recommend them on that. So, and for next remarks, I would like to request Dr. Rajendra Bahadur Shastra to deliver his remarks on the topic. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sajina. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, you can hear me, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you for having me on to discuss some of my views on science diplomacy and its importance, especially in promoting international cooperation, international understanding for peace and prosperity and security. So I'll be touching briefly, given the time actually, on what science diplomacy is all about briefly, and then trying to relate that to how we can use science diplomacy, how to attain the sustainable development goals that's been advocated by the UN and the world. And then lastly, maybe briefly touch on what Nepal's situation is like. With this, okay, I will just go ahead and discuss in brief what science diplomacy is all about. Science, due to its international and universal nature, has the power to cross borders and connect different peoples, communities, and societies. Science diplomacy built on the power of science, using science as a tool to achieve foreign policy objectives where not only the research outcomes, but also science itself as a process and way of communicating may serve to promote peace and sustainable development. Science diplomacy refers to three main types of activities: informing informing foreign policy objectives with scientific advice, which is like science in diplomacy. Secondly, facilitating international science cooperation, diplomacy for science. And thirdly, using science cooperation to improve international relations between countries, science diplomacy. So over the past decades, like Ganeshji also mentioned, it's a very relatively it's a recent phenomenon in our diplomacy internationally. Over the past decade, the use of scientific expertise to advance diplomacy has achieved a number of successes in furthering peace, security, and prosperity. Living development in arms control, for example, poverty reduction, global health, science and innovation policies, climate change, sustainable development, science advice in foreign ministries, and relations between countries is very instructive and very useful. Conventionally, politics is more powerful force than science, at least in the short run. Scientists may have reasonable foresight in the areas of technical study, but they are not very good in predicting the future course of human events. So science diplomacy has made important contributions on topical issues during the past decades. Like I said before, global health stands out. Partnership between governmental and non-governmental, that is the most important part. Public health experts with diplomats and political leaders help deal with challenges such as HIV/AIDS in the past, the spread of infectious diseases such as Ebola, Zika virus, bird flus, MERS, and swine flu, etc., as well as the currently facing COVID-19. And also the rise of non-communicable diseases throughout the world. I had an opportunity to publish a handbook based on international best practices in preventing non-communicable diseases, which accounts now for 2/3 of the world mortality and morbidity. So these are the areas where science diplomacy has been very effective and should proceed on. Another area, the Paris Agreement on the Climate, concluded in 2016, was another great success facilitated by science diplomacy. In this, the partnership of the worldwide scientific community and the governments through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was a game changer. Likewise, implementing the all talked about SDG at global requires ingenuity and willingness to cooperate on all sides of the multiple global divides, be that rich or poor, developed or developing, northern or southern hemisphere, state-led or market-led economies, democracy or non-democracies, high science technology or low science technology, etc. Sustainability consisting of social, economic, and environmental sustainable development is expected to be implemented as a policy package in this. So successful implementation inevitably means aiming for the maximum efficiency and effectiveness of current social and physical infrastructure conditions, as well as searching for new technologies to make these ambitious but absolutely needed goals a reality for the benefit of global survival and constructive future global development. I would like to emphasize here the poor and the underdeveloped countries like Nepal will need transfer of technologies from highly developed industrialized countries, and all countries will be in need of new technologies to make the SDGs become a sustained reality on a global level. Sharing technology for the benefit of human can be achieved through science diplomacy. That's how it is very important. From a global perspective, science and technology could be put to constructive use for the benefit of peace and social and economic development of the world community. And the same holds true for social sciences, which could also be used to achieve destructive or constructive objectives. So science diplomacy should be considered as a means to reduce the many imbalances that exist, to address the common problems, and to build constructive international partnership. Many experts and groups use a variety of definitions for science diplomacy. However, science diplomacy has become an umbrella term to describe a number of formal or informal technical research-based academic or engineering exchanges. And Ganeshji also explained it before in the name of track 1 and track 2 diplomacy. Most of the conventional diplomacy is done on track 1 diplomacy by the government, while the other sector stakeholders in the community, like the NGOs, private sector, the research institutions, etc., are quite, and they are seldom engaged in this. So this is briefly what science diplomacy is all about and what its use for promoting international understanding, prosperity, and security. And now I would like to briefly touch on why science diplomacy is important to attend. You can count up the time, Sajina, and let me know if I'm overpassing the time. Science diplomacy for attaining the SDG. There have been lots of research done on this and reviews done. 7 sustainable development diplomacy, which I've been advocating for the last few years. Diagnostic tools are used to identify a process that takes into account the complexity of the environment, society, and the economy at multiple scales because of the inequality that exists all over the world. All parties and their interests while also utilizing their expert knowledge. And recently, over the years, a number of concerns have been expressed about SDGs, such as the large number, potential trade-offs, and lack of institutional mechanism, which is very important, and means of implementation, the resource part, to achieve this goal. SDG, Sustainable Development Diplomacy approach does not dismiss.
I'm interrupting you. Can you finish it in 2 minutes?
Oh, two more. Okay, I'll go quickly.
Okay.
From a global perspective, what the SDG approach offers is a framework to allow stakeholders to discuss and arrive at mutually agreeable solutions to manage that trade-off. From the global perspective, we should take note that the number of least developed countries like Nepal has risen from 24 in 71 to now 48. So the differences between them matters a lot, how this can be more effectively implemented. And that needs to be taken into account through science diplomacy. As discussed, science diplomacy is use of scientific collaboration among nations to address common problems and to build constructive international partnership. Uh, One thing we need to be very careful about is it is this continuous large-scale imbalances that exist in the world in terms of wealth, standards of living, etc., would increase in like migration, armed conflicts, crime and violence, extremism of all sorts. So these should taken into account by the industrialized nations and the emerging nations to remain capable to stop especially the most important issues that's been raised now as a result of the climate change, further environmental destruction, etc. And with that come increasing vulnerability of large population. This in turn will most certainly lead to more instability and more conflicts, not less, and hence sustainable development, achieving sustainable development goals may not be possible if this is not taken into account. So I will just briefly, in the last remaining couple of minutes, I'll just uh, conclude by saying that Nepal, to achieve, one more aspect that is very important is the keeping track of and monitoring the sustainable development goals that's been achieved over the years. So for that, I think we need a strong monitoring mechanism that includes data uh, based on stakeholder participation, data collection and dissemination, reporting format, and participatory approach to micro foundation monitoring in order to capture the subnational diversities. With this, Nepal is in a nascent stage of utilizing science diplomacy. I had an opportunity to be the part of the high-level committee to review and suggest new avenues of international cooperation in the areas of sustainable development goals and the new foreign policy of Nepal that came after this political change. And we realized it was a mixed group of high-level, technically sound professionals from all political, professional backgrounds, which suggested some of this, what the government of Nepal should be doing. Like as a part of that, we felt Nepal's foreign policy institutions, like it was mentioned before also, such as MOFA, IFA, and the academias that exist in the university and other factors, as well as the think tanks like IDA, Nepal Council of World Affairs, etc. They exist, but their utility has been very minimum, and the government has not been able to utilize their capacity, their skills for progressing science diplomacy in Nepal to achieve SDGs on time. So most important areas of cooperation for Nepal in addressing these would be like addressing the climate change effects on all sectors of livelihood with appropriate adoption and mitigation measures, disaster preparedness and management techniques, dealing with the management of mitigation measures such as like even the pandemics we are suffering now, the COVID, etc., which Nepal is most vulnerable to. And in that connection, I regret Nepal government was, I heard, by the Russian government, Nepal government initially was offered to jointly participate in the vaccine production and research, which Nepal government could not take advantage of. So these are the things, the gaps that exist, and it needs to be strengthened through multiple stakeholder participation, capacity building, research and training, at least by Nepal should be able to build at least by South Asian standard, I would say, to negotiate. Negotiation skill is one of the key deficiencies in our foreign policy because we have been part of so many international national organizations, bilateral agencies, etc., etc. But in the interest, like we have promoted economic diplomacy, but somehow it's not delivering benefits as much as desired. So we need at least to be able to build the capacity of the institutions involved in this to the South Asian standard so that we can negotiate our partnership with all stakeholders. Government alone cannot do it. I urge for a combination of track 1, track 2, and track 3, 4, 5 diplomacy on this. With this, I'll stop right here and maybe we'll take up questions if there is any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And it was delightful to hear from you. So I would like to request Dr. Ramesh Maske sir to give his remarks. Sir, can you unmute yourself, please? Okay. Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm very much honored to be here and listen very authentic, viewpoints from Dr. Rajendra Shrestha. Of course, science diplomacy, he has already defined what is science diplomacy and where it has to be and how it has to be used. The last point he has mentioned that the Russian government offered the vaccine diplomacy to Nepal, but Nepal could not accept, and due to, I think, this lack of science diplomacy. Had it been a possibility for Nepalese government to involve scientists in this aspect of decision making, then probably that would not be, I mean, the Russian government would have already offered the very authentic, the offer to have vaccines, not only the vaccine to get and vaccinated, but also to produce and have a technology transfer in Nepal. So that was a missed opportunity. Having said that, we feel that when I'm working as a science coordinator at UNESCO, and right from the beginning of inception of UNESCO in 1946, based on its legitimacy, credibility, and universality, that to promote science diplomacy for increased scientific collaboration, for widening scientific knowledge, informed diplomacy, for conflict resolution and trust building, and convincing nations to foster science nationally, regionally, and globally. How many years already passed? Nepal is also has a commission, a national commission on for UNESCO, and we had been advocating the science from the schools level and the impact of science on decision making process. But to my knowledge, it is unfortunate that the impact of the scientists to be involved in this decision making process and the foreign policy of Nepal has not been so far to my knowledge not very much positive. We can take how many participants when they go for international foreign policy conferences and meetings, how many scientists are involved in that team. They take jumbo team, but none of the scientists are there to take so realizing that fact, we at least every year in Nepal, the Ministry of Education, Science and Technology started discussion on science diplomacy. Last year, we have organized one day that was just a half day science diplomacy, but science diplomacy in 21st century, seizing opportunities through fostered collaboration in Nepalese context. And that was captured a huge attention from different people, like the diplomats as well as the scientists. And we discussed on 3 pillars of science diplomacy. That the first pillar is the science for diplomacy. Science for diplomacy and diplomacy for science, and science in diplomacy. So it all relates to each other and makes a three-pillar foundation for science diplomacy. So science, why science for diplomacy? The diplomacy without scientific knowledge would be taking a kind of a, on a very sentimental way of decision making and only ideological or partisan way of making decision. So informed decision making is very much needed. The science provides the evidence-based decision making. So the diplomats, when they talk, when they involve scientists, then they can have very good evidence-based, and so the negotiation can be achieved for win-win situation for both sides. And diplomacy for science is also needed because scientists alone cannot have kind of the situation when diplomats do not talk about science. For example, establishment of international space station or establishment of CERN in Switzerland, where a lot of scientists come together. Even we don't need to go farther when we have ICIMOD here. ICIMOD is kind of good example of science diplomacy, in my view, and many other my colleagues also realize that one. That the ICIMOD is kind of a tiny SARC where the conflict, where India and Pakistan do not talk to each other, but when they come to the ICIMOD, they are very friendly. So scientists find their common language to talk and discuss the problems they have back in country, the political ideology, which suppresses the goodwill for both countries. So when science speaks, or when scientists speak, then they speak the same language, they speak the same emotion, they speak the same knowledge. So they know when one country achieves something economically, it has great impact on the neighboring countries also. For example, water diplomacy we have. How many years we have been, suppressed by Indian diplomacy, the ideology that, anyway, the water flows to India and Nepal do not need anything to do upstream. So that, seized our development, our economic development. So what India has to do is, water, when Nepal builds a dam or hydropower, it's all about, adding values to that water. Anyway, water flows to India. That is free of cost for India to have that one. But when we add value to water and produce electricity, we could sell that electricity to India and Bangladesh. Why not to build, only 28 kilometer of transmission line to supply to Bangladesh, so we could have alternative. So where is the diplomacy there? It is not difficult for India to provide 28 kilometers for transmission line to supply electricity to third world. So here we have to play. Scientists have to play a good role in achieving such kind of economic development. Taking example of Switzerland, we don't have to Switzerland. How Switzerland is? It's also landlocked, but it's not a mine-locked country. It has developed tiny things like watches and trams and other things, the technologies that were also beneficial to neighboring countries. So why neighboring countries should put embargo on neighboring countries like India did in 2017 after the earthquake, where we much needed the energy and support from India, but lack of the understanding, lack of involvement of scientists, they just took that step to give Nepalese people very difficult situation. But somehow our country, though still very difficult situation locating between two giants, the the diplomacy plays very vital role in keeping peace and prosperity in this region. And and we suggest that if they involve scientists to be in their team making decision, then more more things will come, more soft power will come, so that will only advocate for development rather than destruction. So this year also we have started a dialogue on science diplomacy by putting the slogan that science diplomacy for disaster prevention and epidemics. That we have been witnessing for 2 years that the epidemics, which is non-visible but very powerful, that provided some kind of a message to UNESCO and who gave the joint a statement on open science. They have seen that the borders were closed. You cannot bring the things that you needed for your country to prevent or fight against the COVID. But once they have gave this joint statement to have open science, universities, those who have this knowledge of making things like necessary, maybe the protection devices or mask, or maybe the oxygen production, these ideas are came through there openly, so that our technologists or scientists could work on that, and whatever available we have, that without having any imported things, we could also try to fight against the COVID last year. So to commemorate about that achievement, we again continued that science diplomacy to discuss in a higher level, so that the informed people like diplomats, the last year we have diplomats, our Nepali diplomat to Israel, the former diplomat to China, Dr. Mas Maske, and other very pertinent figures were there to discuss about science diplomacy. This year we faced Melamchi disaster, and that is kind of a natural disaster, but it could be man-made disaster. So we have to have that scientific knowledge of the upstream of Melamchi or any other rivers to find out what could happen later in maybe there's very old glaciers are there, or glacial lakes were there where a lot of moraines were deposited, and somehow that was triggered by powerful vibration probably, or the continuous incessant rain that triggered that mud flow. So that type of scientific knowledge is necessary. We have not had we're very very less studies being done about such a kind of a disaster, but we need to involve more scientists to find out what could happen, or what kind of disaster, what kind of vulnerability we have having that hazard upstream of river. So everywhere we need scientists to advocate their position, to take good decision, and the diplomats can take that advantageously, so that they can make a very powerful decision for their countries, not only for their countries, for other countries also in the negotiation table. So win-win situation we need to bring through only scientific diplomacy. Thank you so much. I think most of the thing already been covered by Dr. Shrestha, so I had to curtail my thing. But one last thing I want to tell that again the questions may arise. I have 6 questions I put forward. Probably that could be already discussed, maybe discussed. What is science diplomacy? We just talked about. And second is, what are the strengths of science diplomacy? Also, I highlighted that one. And the third one is why it is needed in foreign policy. That we already both touched upon. And the fourth one is how science diplomacy can play a vital role in Nepal foreign policy. That I mentioned about open science. That could be one solution there. And the fifth one is what should be done in immediate action. And the sixth one was the who should take care of it. And another question may be attached to it: why has it not been taken care in past Nepalese foreign policy? So these questions come again and again unless until both diplomats and scientists come together and sit on table and have the discussion. Here I see Dr. Rajendra Shrestha as a diplomat. Maybe I represent Kathmandu University, partly NAST and UNESCO, and I'm from academic background, so I may be a scientist. So only two people we are here, and our actual ambassador, science ambassador, is Ganesha. So he mentioned that Ganesha विज्ञानलाई समाजसँग जोड्नुपर्छ, त्यही कुरा नै यहाँ मुख्य हुन आउँछ। समाजसँग जोड्नु भनेको डिप्लोमेट्सहरूले सामाजिक कुराहरूलाई पोलिटिकल कुराहरू ल्याउँछ भने, विज्ञान जोडियो भने हामीले समृद्धि पनि प्राप्त गर्न सक्छौँ र खुसी नेपाली अरू सुखी नेपाली पनि बनाउन सक्छौँ। यही कुरा उहाँको जुन छ, मैले राख्दै म सानो कुरा यही बिट मार्न चाहन्छु। धन्यवाद।
Thank you so much, sir. It is great to hear that you have taken initiation for diplomacy science for this epidemic, but it's very unfortunate to hear that we do not have any role of scientists in our making of our foreign policy. So it's very sad to hear that. And I think we have some questions here. I will read that. The fact that Nepal is very vulnerable to climate change, how science diplomacy can help to cope the climate change issues. I think Rajendra sir has taught this subject a little bit, but can you please expand it, or we can go for another question?
Like I mentioned earlier, like climate change, Nepal is one of the most vulnerable countries in the world, and we are in between two giant neighbors which are rapidly expanding their development, and as a result, the development has not that been sustainable, and we are facing the effect of that. And climate change is now affecting almost all sectors of livelihood, as I mentioned, be it agriculture, energy, water, health, all of that. And Nepal is having to pay a big price for that, even though it is not its own doing. So if we have a diplomacy at that level, where with scientific evidences and the participation is an interdisciplinary team of scientists as well as social scientists putting together and with a skill to negotiate, that is the key word. Because Nepal's foreign policy, as I have reviewed for quite some time now, we are still lacking the part of the skills definitely needed, the trainings definitely needed, but still we don't have the negotiating skills in our interest. That's what is hampering us. Like Maskiji also mentioned about the water resource part. See, we have not been able to take advantage of the very rich resources we have because we have not been able to negotiate it properly with our Indian counterparts on this. It's treated traditionally more like just flowing water, and so it has as if it has no price in it. It's not. This regulated water has all kinds of benefits, and especially India receives not only power benefit, but irrigation benefit, navigation benefit, health benefit, water supply sanitation benefit, all of that put together. And if we are in a better position to negotiate that, then Nepal will have gained a lot. So it's a win-win in that sense. Right now, what's happening is one wins and the other loses. Lack of that negotiation skills. I think that should tell why we need science diplomacy at this juncture to deal with climate change and other global issues.
May I? Hello.
Yes, sir, we can
May
hear.
I, may I put some light on
Yes, yes,
this?
sure.
Why, how science diplomacy? Uh, One example is like very recently we have done. Nepal is very vulnerable due to GLOF. You know, GLOF is glacial lake outburst flood, and because of climate change, their GLOF vulnerability for this outburst of glacier lakes is very high. Out of more than 100 glacier lakes that are prone to, endangered, we have selected only four. Two were, out of six, two were already, some kind of engineering already been done, like Chorolpa and Imja, where I was also involved in designing myself, leading the team. And this time I was leading studying of four lakes. You know, how science can support or prevent disaster due to climate change. You know, climate change is just a triggering factor. Okay, we have been witnessing the erratic rains and other things. So sometimes, Kathmandu Valley is very, very, you know, subtropical or tundra like, you know, um, weather we have. But in Nepal, in Kathmandu Valley, now we can grow banana and mangoes and other things, which actually for tropical and subtropical region. So science, it is evident now that there is something going on, that the climate is being changed. Now we need to have a data collection, so technology to be developed. And what we found that we Nepalese scientists have also some ideas to whatever means and tools they have accessible, they can do their job and generate the data so that they can provide evidence base that something is happening, and because of this it is happening. Like now young generation of scientists are coming up. Like you may have heard about Nepal Sat 1. That's a satellite, the tiny satellite, which is now roaming, of low Earth orbit for 400 kilometers in the space. Now, these scientists are also working on the methodology, and the tools they are developing is to find out the lake's level. So because of the climate change, the lake's level might go up, and the vulnerable moraine may get breached. So the gulf might occur. So if we could get that data earlier stage and monitor the fluctuation of the water due to the instrumentation they may develop, and that send the signal to space, and that space signal directly to the ground station of NAST or other institution related to, responsible to, then people could be saved. A lot of things could be saved. So here we need such kind of diplomacy so that the foreign policy or the diplomats could understand the need of such technology in Nepal. But we cannot put our satellites to space by ourselves because of the landlockedness. So we need to have support from India either or China. So they can take the satellite to to the space with their rockets. So there is a need for diplomacy so that Nepalese satellite could be taken by Indian ISR to the space or Chinese. So there is a need of such diplomacy so that we can also put some of our brains in protecting us from the disaster.
Thank you so much, sir. So we also have another question. It says, in the time when geopolitics is so prominent, how science diplomacy can be balanced by the states. Or can answer this or
Oh, I didn't get your last sentence though.
so it says so it's question from Rewat Roshan. So he is asking in the time when geopolitics is so prominent, how
Uh-huh.
science diplomacy can be balanced by the states.
By the
States, countries.
state. Oh,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
yeah, I think we've covered this quite a bit of this in our presentation also. Like Nepal is going through this very quite vulnerable stage at this juncture because of geopolitical nature as well as our own lack of preparedness to deal with the situation. So definitely, as I said earlier, state alone cannot do this. State has to combine its strength with other stakeholders from the non-governmental sectors like the NGOs, the private sector, the scientific community, the research think tanks, which like, for example, China and India are there where they are now because of that, because they have been taking advantage of think tanks like that. The scientific communities in their negotiation skills, in their approach to deal with national, international communities in their own interest. That's what is lacking. So definitely, first, government definitely has to commit. Not just by word, in terms of actual doing. They have to bring on board the interdisciplinary nature committees to deal with these issues, various technical issues where scientist community can contribute a lot, but to take advantage of that and translate that into a diplomatic forum and negotiate and end in the result, you need the other component. That's the diplomacy part. So if the two can be combined very well, then things happen. So the government definitely has to do that. And we had proposed when we were doing this review and recommending the government then, the problem in Nepal is foreign policy is taken very politically. Like one party comes, they think it's theirs. The other party comes, they think it's theirs. So as a result, there is no, the continuity in foreign policy, which the international community, whether they are friends or foes, they are trying to take advantage of that weakness. That's where we need to focus on. If this is the domestic policy for development, that has to be extended foreign policy. So foreign policy is actually, to be effective, it's an extension of domestic policy, which is not realized by the political parties and the leadership. They are actually, I would say, short-sighted by their own vested interest at the cost of national interest. So that needs to be addressed upon, and people need to rise up to convince them or advocate these things. And the academia, I felt like I was reading some time back, over the years, science education has fared so poorly that our students are faring very poorly in science education, which is a pity. In this world of competition, I think that what we need to do is to emphasize more on the advantages of science education and put that into use for day-to-day life, and then to address the global issues, regional issues, national issues before it happens and it destroys, like we've been facing it for the last, I don't know, decades. So sustainability is all about that. That's why I've been advocating sustainable development diplomacy is what Nepal needs now in the true sense.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Ramesh, sir, do you want to add some comment on that?
I just want to, add on what already Dr. Srestha mentioned. This SDG goal 2030 is a kind of example of science diplomacy. Um, in a very it does not say who countries are, how it is landlocked or geopolitical situation, everything. The UNO has already put this forward. Every nation has to do it. And the 17th goal is the collaboration.
Mhm.
Yeah. And without that, that should be put in first. Actually, zero hunger, how could you achieve zero hunger if countries do not collaborate? So in such a situation, the diplomats should understand from both sides, the political parties and the government should understand that if Nepal gets kind of economic development, then the which product Nepalese will buy? Of course, Indian product. So both will be in win-win situation. If we get impoverished, we cannot buy their materials, and so all those 16 goals is, pivoted to only one goal, is that is the collaboration and cooperation. So without that, we cannot achieve 2030, and it's so near, and we are still looking forward to have that kind of collaboration actually in action. And to bring that in action, our political leaders should form an advisory group of a lot of scientists who have that knowledge, discuss with that scientist of the other side of the negotiation table, and bring the common language to understand. Forget about who wins and who loses. Only when we talk, negotiate, the whole world will benefit. So that is the science diplomacy. Thank you.
Very much, sir. Ganesh, sir, can you hear me?
Yes,
Sir, can you add some? Do you want to add some points here? I think
any concluding गर्ने हो अरु केही छ?
deliver concluding remarks. I think we are good. It's already 3:07, so I think it's time to
I
wrap up.
take
So
2-3 minutes.
yes,
First
sir,
of
sir.
all, thanks to our both panelists, both Dr. Rajendra Bahadur Srishti and Dr. Ramesh Maske, for giving very insight. And he rightly said, the one side is the scientist, another side is diplomats. So let us continue this dialogue also in the future with I think we'll design a program might be a science diplomacy dialogue. Like Rajendra said today, there's the issues of the SDG. Ramesh has raised issues of the this space issues. So might be other issues, you see. So I think what I think that we have the few, and myself and Ramesh am talking, that there are the few international science days related, where I think we should discuss on the different parameters of the science. Especially, I will emphasize that three things. One is the first in Nepal, Nepalese scientists and Nepalese diplomats, individually and institutionally. So there is the institution of Foreign Affairs, IFA, Institute of Foreign Affairs, and Ministry. At the same time, in the university we have. So as the first, let us on the national level discuss what agenda Nepal has to read in the regional or in the global arena. For example, in after 1 month or 2 months time, there is going to be the COP26. So how we the diplomats or the scientists want that the country should raise the issues of the climate change? Is it just on the, oh no, we have, we don't pollute, but we are victims? What type of victims you are, how much you losses or what you want, you see? What is the general terminology will has no meaning now. As all of us said that it has to be evidence-based and has to be concretely so that the international community listens on the issues of the climate change. Saying I am talking might be that type of things that the days or the issues what we are facing. I just might be on the issues of the climate change issue, the SDG issues, all the technical collaboration. So let us start a science diplomacy dialogue on what I call on the national level. Second is, you see, now IDA has a international relations also. So might be, because we have been talking on the, I was last time on the IDA as their advisor to the BIMSTEC. So on the BIMSTEC level, we should organize a regional level science diplomacy. What are the diplomats' role? What are the scientists' role? You see. So second is the, I already told it is on the regional level. Lastly, what I think that we must write a letter to the Vice Chancellor of 2-3 university requesting them to start a short-term course, or I don't know, a specialized course on the science diplomacy, so that our scientists, I want to sometimes have a dream, why not to make a scientist diplomats, or I mean His Excellency, what they call it, or the ambassador to any country. So, for example, I was making last time comments on the MCC. I was talking, let America give this money, not for that, but might be for the science development in Nepal. As Dr. Rajendra was saying, that our science education is weak at the grassroots level. It is on the upper level also. So why not to MCC money? Why they should say for the political controversy? But if it will come on the science, I think there will be very less controversy on this. So to bring international collaborations also in the field of what I mean, what I call it, investment in the science brings more results. So there is a saying of C.V. Raman, Dr. Moske in there is a C.V. Raman Hall. So I all the time when I in this forum, I say what C.V. Raman says, does the poor need science? And C.V. Raman answer was, poor need more science, and more science. So let us do for more science, for more science. Let us do more science diplomacy, and more science diplomacy. With these few words, I thank you, all of you, to our panelists, to our participant, and those who are watching from the Facebook and others. I think Sajina will edit and put it in their website also, so that those who had not listened, they can also listen our eminent speakers, and later do some of them. There might be, if they are students, they can do their thesis, and these 2 persons will come as a external to their. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. And I'd like to thank Dr. Rajendra Bahadur Shrestha, sir, and Dr. Ramesh Maski, sir. Thank you very much for giving your precious time to this session and delivering such insightful reviews. And it was very, I was very delighted to hear from both of you. And we are always thankful to Ganesh, sir. He has been always supportive to us. So we are extremely thankful to him. And thank you all the participants.
First, Sajina, first science diplomacy ambassador. Okay.
Okay.